our next speaker is Dr. Suman Badami, who will be presenting her paper on Vimarsha and Samavesha, Cognition through Stasis. And just a small intro for Dr. Badami. Dr. Suman Badami is a Bharatnatyam dancer and teacher based in Mumbai. She has a PhD in a comparative study, religious and aesthetic concepts of 10th century Kashmir Shaivism, Mumbai University, and a fellowship for research in Bharatnatyam from Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Her training in Bharatnatyam was in Chennai under Sri S.K. Kameshwaran and Srimati Saroja Kameshwaram. She runs a dance academy, Natya Vimarsha, in Mumbai and has conducted several Arangetrams and performances of the students. As a committee member of Powai Fine Arts Mumbai, she coordinates professional dance and music performances along with the team and also coordinates training in classical music and dance by professional teachers for students registered with this academy. She is a recipient of several awards, some of which are Nritya Kala Sagar by Nateshwar Kala Mandir, Shivali Nritya Shiromani by Shivali Society, Natya Ratna, Rasika Ranjani Sabha Mumbai, Taranga Ratna 2022, Takshashila Nritya Kala Mandir. She has presented papers on Bharatnatyam and aesthetics of classical Indian dance at several seminars and conferences, including the World Congress of Dance, the Natya Darshan Conference, Chennai TIS, and recently for Epicentre Women's Day. She has performed extensively at several venues and festivals in India and abroad and online. She is a member of the UN International Dance Council and Association of Bharatnatyam Artists of India. Welcome to this conference, Sumanji. We look forward to your paper. 20+5 is the time duration. The stage is all yours.
Namaskaram to all, and thank you so much for firstly curating a conference on this topic on Kashmir, and also for inviting me to be a part of this conference with such excellent scholars. I am a Bharatanatyam dancer, and this is just my humble point of view, and I hope you accept it. For me, culture, the word culture encompasses all that is embedded and embodied in the belief systems of a place in a certain time, within a certain context. And some of these can be understood only in that embedded and embodied environment, all these arts, the traditions, the philosophies of each place. But for me, at a very personal level, in my quest to understand my art form of Bharatanatyam that I practice, which is so deeply entrenched in the temple traditions of the South India, and which is so deeply even now in that format of the Bhakti Sringara debate that is ongoing in the contemporary perception of the art form, I have found deep resonance to all my questions in the works of Acharya Abhinavagupta. Viewing the creative process and the resultant experience in a cultural performance through the lens of Kashmir Shaivism, therefore, for me, is not just to look back at a point in history, at some point in the past, but to understand and acknowledge the relevance and validity of all these thoughts today. A contemporary perception of our classical arts, I think, we can get only from works, especially from the works of Acharya Abhinavagupta. Can the art stand by itself without the religious props or the philosophical heavy backdrops? How do we correlate to the contemporary content and to the nature of the art experience? Are you able to see the next slide?
No, ma'am. Could you please press the down arrow key?
I'm doing that. There seems to be a problem. Can I just start sharing again?
Yes, for sure.
I don't know what the issue is. So I will go to...
Yes, slideshow, please.
It's not coming on slideshow?
Not yet. Ma'am, the rightmost icon next to your magnifier slider.
Yeah, I've done that. What is happening today?
No problem. Okay, let's go to resume slideshow and see what happens. Yeah, now could you press the...
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we are good. We are good. Thank you.
Good. From the incredibly vast literature and resources of Kashmir Shaivism, it is my modest attempt to seek similarities on a few critical concepts in the two texts, the Ishvara Pratyabhignya Vimarshini and the Abhinava Bharati, two remarkable works of Acharya Abhinavagupta. The main focus of this paper would be to highlight some key concepts to analyze if it was an overwriting of an aesthetic theory with Shaivism concepts, or is the artistic process itself a means to a spiritual apprehension of a human experience, the spiritual cognition within the aesthetic theory and the concept of bhakti. Abhinavagupta was a rare combination of poet and philosopher. He discards pluralism and holds reality to be absolute unity. At the top, he places Anuttara, the absolute of which all creations are manifestations. His conception of the universal, the absolute, is based on the analysis of the human mind, which reveals two aspects. Mind that receives reflection and is self-luminous, Shiva or Prakasha, there is no consciousness at this point. The other aspect is that the mind knows itself in all its purity. This aspect technically termed as Shakti or Vimarsha. This awareness of the self is the second category, self-consciousness. The world of experience is real. It is a manifestation of the universal consciousness, but it is also ideal because it is nothing but an experience of the supreme self itself. The Trika system, because of its theory of Abhasavada, is called as realistic idealism. Abhasa is defined as all that is, all that exists, all the manifestations of the supreme consciousness, all the associations of the limited self with the body, and all forms of knowledge. The Pratyabhijna school of recognition is a branch of Kashmir Shaivism, and the term Trika was also used by Abhinavagupta for the Pratyabhijna Shastras. Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, the doctrine of divine recognition, is a commentary on the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Sutras of Utpalacharya. This thought system believes that the gross elements which present the state of differentiation is the means for inferring the undifferentiated state, Shiva. Shiva is the source of tattvas. In this system, the self realizes that he is essentially Shiva. The gross elements with the subtle, through the faculties of action and the faculties of knowledge, beyond the mind, ego, and instinct, is sublimated. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, beyond Buddhi, Ahamkara, and Manas, beyond Maya, is sublimated. In a parallel look at the art experience in the Abhinava Bharati, Acharya Abhinavagupta says this in the Abhinava Bharati. The spectator sees the actors and actresses dressed in costumes suited for their different parts and is willing to accept them as characters they represent. But he finds it difficult to accept them as the original characters they represent, as they are not actually so. A peculiar illusion is created in which he completely forgets the time and place associated with the actors and the characters that they represent. He does not exclude his own self from this experience. The more he enjoys the dramatic situation on stage, the more he identifies with the action, and the result is that his whole personality, body, and soul gets electrified. In a unique mood of sympathy and empathy, he weeps or laughs with the actor. He does not remain a detached spectator, but joins in a unique experience of a universal feeling along with other sensitive souls in the gallery. So, the spectator, through the aesthetic process, moves from the individual to universal, where sattva, rajas, tamas is beyond the gunas, it's nirguna, moves from sense to transcendence, where the individual ego, intellect, and mind is aware at that point of the unifying universal. This system talks of three means or upayas of experiencing universal consciousness. Shambhava upaya, the energy of the will, Ichcha Shakti, the will to manifest and reabsorb. It is the realm of thoughtlessness. Shaktopaya, the energy of knowledge, Jnana Shakti, all actions and thoughts, which is centered, the one-pointedness. Anava upaya, the energy of action, Kriya Shakti, concentration in the world of duality. Beyond these three is another upaya called anupaya, where there is nothing to be done. One is uplifted through divine grace, and this energy is called Ananda Shakti. These are not different parts, but rather one occurring after the other. In the aesthetic perception, the duality of the subject and the aesthetic object exists first, and the subject engages with the object, identifies with it, staying with complete and firm focus, merges with it beyond the concepts of time and space, or the effect of the vibhavas, etc., into a steady equanimity, and then, without any effort, is lifted up to transcendence. Moving to the Abhinava Bharati, Abhinavagupta also pays homage to Shiva at the beginning of each chapter of this aesthetic theory. Abhinava Bharati refers to the 36 categories of the Pratyabhijna system, one category for each chapter of the Nati Shastra. He seems to indicate through verses that he considered the experience of the self in Rasananda also as a path of self-realization within the Tattva scheme, where the individual rises to the universal. In the first few chapters of the verses refer to Shiva as Dharani Rupam, Jalamurti, Tejopura Ishwaram, Samira Murti, Vyoma Murti, and Rasamatra Murti. And in the end, he pays homage to Anuttara, the inconceptualizable Paramashiva, the unsurpassed. In the Abhinava Bharati, the self-conscious properly means the action being done by a tasting subject and may be thought of as a mental cognition consisting of direct experience, imagination, and remembrance. The very same is mentioned about the self-consciousness in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini also by Abhinavagupta. He says, if there not be one great Lord who is essentially self-luminous, holds within all the innumerable forms of the universe, and possesses the powers of cognition, remembrance, and differentiation. The aesthetic process starts with the direct perception of objects. After perception, one identifies with an essential attribute of that object. This essential attribute is neither illusory, nor an imitation, nor a reproduction. The spectator then moves to a world of imagination. The objectivity is still there. The subjective limitations are also there. In the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, he states that the power of imagination in all beings proves that the power of knowledge and action are there within oneself. So the ability to have the rasa experience is latent in all. The powers of the Lord are also within all. I quote, all worldly transactions depend on the triad of powers. It is due to the triad of powers of that glorious one that there is manifestation of limited perceivers. It is he who directly experiences, remembers, and determinately cognizes the various limited subjects. Sthayi is not mentioned by Bharata in the definition of rasa. It is the very basis, the essence of that aswada. Abhinavagupta says the sthayi is the king of bhavas. The sthayi cannot be perceived directly and is through the vibhavas, etc. It is something in the subconscious and is identified by linking it to something of the past in the spectator's memory. If it had been mentioned along with the vibhavas, etc., he says, readers would have been misled into thinking that it is an objective element like the vibhavas and the anubhavas. In the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, Abhinavagupta says the following about memory. We bow to that Shiva who strings in a regular order the multitude of gems, the objects which lie heaped up in the treasury of his heart on the string of remembrance. It is not possible for the limited subject to apprehend the universal directly, as he would not recognize its value as such. The spectator first, through the vibhavas, etc., on stage, identifies the sthayi, and then the intensification of that leads to the rasananda. Abhinavagupta explains this fact that the limited self cannot access the supreme directly in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini also. The object which shines independently is first perceived by the limited self as separate from itself. At this stage, it is limited by its individual constraints. He wrote, similarly, though the Lord of the universe is ever shining within as the very self, yet his shining does not make the heart full of ananda because the self is not yet realized to be transcendental. Aesthetic perception is a generalized perception in the minds of the spectator because it is free of limitations and obstacles. In the Abhinava Bharati, he terms this universal nature as Sadharanikarana. In the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, he terms this as Samanya Rupatva. The Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini states the same. An object shines as separate and also as co-mingled with others on account of its element of universality. Thus, when the separateness or diversity of abhasas occupies a subordinate position to that of identity, then there is true universality, Samanya Rupatva, insofar as the identity tinges or qualifies various similar individual objects. But when the abhasa is determinately cognized in a total isolation, then its universality is not real, but simply possible because of its fitness to tinge a number of similar individual external objects. It is cognition by the eye and ears, and then identifying it with something of the past in the spectator's memory. Rasa is cognition, that is recognition. Abhinavagupta considers this succession of memory as a spiritual means. He claims that memory is the very synthesizer and origin of all experiences. Therefore, the self-luminous principle, which becomes extrovert at the time of grasping an external object, has as its introvert self-luminosity intact even at a subsequent time, and this introvert self-luminosity becomes aware of its having become extrovert in relation to a particular object, and therefore is called the power of remembrance. The different manifestations due to the Apohana Shakti get triggered by the Sthayi or the memory Shakti Smriti to a universal state of recognition, recognition, Rasananda, which is Vimarsha. Abhinavagupta has stated that the individual becomes unselfish through the process that leaves him experiencing a universal state of feeling. So it could be said that both the Natya Shastra and the Abhinava Bharati emphasize this unselfish state, devoid of the individual ego or consciousness of the I. It ended in an experience that through its very nature has so transformed the spectator to experience a sensation that is far removed from his practical reality and is a state of equilibrium, which is due to the fact that the bhavas, which are the stimuli, are no longer present at this level. In the Pratyabhijna Shastras, the individual ascends the Tattva ladder from gross to the pure self-consciousness. The Vimarsha, resting within Prakasha and signifying unity, is termed as Aham. The consciousness dependent upon another is represented as Idam. In the state that comes in between the two, there arises the consciousness I, this. At this state, the I and the this are at the same level, like the pans of an evenly held balance. These are the categories Sadashiva and Ishvara. This point is Shama in the Rasa experience. The term he uses for the level of unity of that experience represented by Prakasha and Vimarsha is Samvid. Just as Shama is the substratum of all the sthayis, Samvid is that substratum, the point of rest, unity of all diversity. Abhinavagupta says that sthayi in a state of Samvid is Bhoga. Bhoga is synonymous for Rasa. Therefore, Samvid is that state of Rasananda, a state of equilibrium, a state of cessation of desires. In the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, Abhinavagupta describes this state of cessation of desires as a state of devotional attitude. He has said, those who are rich in the wealth of devotion have nothing left to be desired. We can interpret this as Shama, Samvid, Bhoga, which are all the states of devotional attitude, as Bhakti. Shama is also the sthayi of all the sthayis. Abhinavagupta introduces this as the sthayi for the ninth rasa, Shanta. He argued for the ninth rasa, Shanta, for the highest Purushartha, Moksha. Rasananda in its transcendental level is the rasa of Moksha. The transcendence of the self also has aesthetic validity like all other rasas. This in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini is a recognition of the individual as the highest Lord. In order, he says, in order that the common man may have the transcendental power Siddhi without much effort, Utpala, the son of Udayakara, has written this. The word Jana simply means man. It is for the benefit of all. Its aim is great because its purpose is to enable common man to realize the higher and lower Siddhis without much effort. In the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, he says, the word Dasya. It means a state of the devotee to whom the Lord gives all that is desired. So, in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini, the self, devoid of duality, in a state of unity, is termed as devotee. The same could therefore be applied to the self in a state of Rasananda at Shama. In the Abhinava Bharati, Abhinava says devotion and faith, bhakti and shraddha, which are infused with recollection, reflection, steadfastness, striving, and contemplation of the Lord, are both in other ways supportive of Shantarasa and therefore not counted separately because it is the sthayi along with Shraddha. It could be said that Shama is Bhakti, Samavesha is the entry to divinity, the path to the transcendental. The highest level of experience is due to Samavesha, the immersion in the latent traces of one's own feelings, and it is this very nature of the self that leads to the highest experience. At the transcendental level, free consciousness is the chief characteristic of the self-luminous principle. This free will is termed as Svatma Paramarsha. It is that very first stir in the absolute unity, Param Spandanam. At the transcendental level, the unity of Prakasha and Vimarsha is termed as Swatantriya Samvid Shakti. Maybe that is why bhakti doesn't find a place in the listing of the bhavas or rasas in both the Natya Shastra and the Abhinava Bharati. The texts laid the path that would lead to a state of divinity at the Rasananda level. The very nature of the self leads to the highest experience. It is a state of humility. It is a state of surrender of all individuality, surrender of ego, termed as dasya, which is the state of the spectator in the bliss of the rasa experience. Therefore, Shiva and Shakti are absolute necessities in the aesthetic experience to validate the transcendental experience of Shantarasa. In conclusion, it could be said that art in the aesthetic theory, as presented by Abhinavagupta, had within it the power to lead the self to a path of divinity or bhakti, of stasis and equilibrium or samavesha, leading to a transcendental experience, Shantarasa or Vimarsha. On the flip side, Kashmir Shaivism points to the potential in art that reveals the universal nature of devotion beyond the narrow walls of religion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumanji. It's a coincidence that Harikiranji is planning a symposium on Hindu spirituality, and in that the key terms are Shraddha and Bhakti. And you brought them from Abhinav Gupta is really very important.